and I kept trying to think of other stuff, but this idea, like, that we are vulnerable at all times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's not this like, oh, we have moments of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
We have moments of awareness.
Right.
But then it's like, okay, and vulnerability is our ticket to flourishing. I mean, like, vulnerability and flourishing are connected.
Right.
And so for me, it was like, okay, that redirects my attention from trying to eradicate vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
which, oh
Mm-hmm.
my gosh, that would be horrible. Because
Right.
I can remove myself from being vulnerable, and that is a very small life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think of the myriad ways that I actually do that
Mm-hmm.
on a
Mm-hmm.
regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not, I've not become a hermit,
Right.
right? I'm not removing myself, but like, I'm the guy who, I mean, we have this lovely neighborhood that
Mm-hmm.
we've lived in for almost 30 years,
Wow.
and my wife, Phyllis, she loves to get behind. She invites women over to have
The one you don't want to talk
margarita.
to. The wife you don't want to talk to. Okay, yes.
Okay.
Invited over. That was
Yeah,
so
and like
funny.
and when we have like holidays where we'll, like, we're in the past where you block off the end of the street and you just bring
Oh,
stuff out, and the neighborhood comes together, and we have cookout or whatever. I am supremely self-conscious
wow.
at these things, like, because I don't, it's not like I mean, I see my neighbors frequently throughout the day, but I don't have a lot of I don't spend a lot of deep intimate time with my neighbors, and I'm just very self-conscious about this. And so I have this narrative in my head,
Dialogue.
this dialogue, right? Well, it's not even between me and my shame attendant.
Yeah.
It's kind of a one-way. It's more like a monologue, and I'm the one who's listening.
Yeah.
And the primary, the main version of it goes something like, I'm just really pretty uninteresting, and they're not really going to be that interested
Oh
in
my
talking to me.
gosh.
Like, I'm going to be perceived as being boring, and like, I mean,
And then you want to go
it's
home. You want to go home. It would be like, you guys
right.
have fun.
So I have to, like, I come up, I develop a tactic for how I go to this neighborhood gathering, and the tactic is, I think of, like, who are the 2 or 3 people that I'm going to try to have conversations with,
Mm-hmm.
so that I can
Mm-hmm.
be comfortably engaged for like 20 minutes with this person.
Uh-huh.
And then, and whereas my wife is just kind of like very comfortably moving from this person for a few minutes, then this person for a few minutes, and this person for a few
Right.
minutes. And I'm like, I don't know how to do small
Mm-hmm.
talk. I'm
Yeah.
not like, and it's not just because, oh, I'm not interested in small talk, that's beneath me. I mean, like, it's a matter of, like, I don't know how to do this. And she said, she said, Kurt, look, you went to a small Christian college. You didn't go to enough frat parties. She said, like,
That's your problem.
she said, like, I got practice when I was in college,
Right.
and they weren't even, they weren't, alcoholic infused. Like, she just had lots of experience with lots of parties where you
Social
practice,
gathering.
but not me. And so I have this sense of, like, I'm not that interesting.
Mm-hmm. Ugh.
And it's like the
Which,
engine that drives everything. So, like,
mm-hmm.
I will find ways, like my vulnerability, like, I
Mm-hmm.
respond by encasing myself, which
Right.
doesn't make me less vulnerable. It
Right.
just
It
makes
doesn't
me
work.
less. No, it just makes me less connected.
Right. Which then it's like a vicious circle. Then,
Yeah,
because that just feeds you're not interesting, which you're
yeah.
anything but not interesting.
Well, and I can imagine the message that I could end up
Mm-hmm.
sending without trying to send this is to other people, is that I don't think that they're interesting either,
Right.
because I'm not, like, moving from person to person to person to person. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Mm. Yeah.
yeah. You said
Um,
two things you said.
yeah. Okay. So the other thing, and this is like kind of in left field. So we're first, maybe not first, but we're physically vulnerable,
Mhm.
and that our
Right.
mind can't tell the difference between physical and emotional, like, So then I
Right.
thought, and I want to hear your thoughts on that, but then I thought, okay, Solo, Free Solo, that movie,
Hmm.
where the guy climbs El Capitan without ropes, um without anything, right?
In beauty, yeah, yeah.
So, and others that do like these extreme adventures and put themselves in tremendous physical vulnerability. So then I
Hmm.
thought, okay, does their brain, does their, are they more easily vulnerable emotionally and relationally because they experience physical vulnerability with greater intensity? Does that make sense?
Well, I think if you're asking this question, if I understand your question, you're being curious, like what is it like to be someone? I'm forgetting the climber's name.
I know. I know.
Um, I can see him,
Yep. Yeah. I
and
can hear him. I can hear him
yeah,
talking.
yeah, and you wonder like, well, one can only imagine that at a certain level, the vulnerability that we all sense as we're watching that
Mm-hmm.
unfold is something to which he may not have that much access to. In other words, he may not have the same
Mm-hmm.
sensitivity
Mm-hmm.
to his physical vulnerability as you or I would have if we suddenly found ourselves, for me, like even 10 feet up on El Cap,
It's right.
let
Looking at it.
alone, whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
And so some of this does have to do with certain, sensitivity. And so to this example of about me and my neighbor in our neighborhood parties, like we know that children come into the world temperamentally
Mm-hmm.
relatively shy or relatively less shy. So
Oh,
kids come into
interesting.
the world
Mm-hmm.
with, and some kids are, if you've got a more active right hemisphere, you tend to be a little more observant.
Mm-hmm.
You're not as comfortable with novel stimuli.
Ah.
So you kind of like watch and wait.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a relatively more highly active left hemisphere,
Mm-hmm.
you're more attracted to, captivated by, compelled by novel stimuli. You're drawn to this, and so you go toward that. So
Right.
I'm in the former category. I
Mm-hmm.
was constitutionally shy. I'm like a 4-year old walking into kindergarten with my 17-year-old brother who's
Oh,
driven me to school. And we walk in past all these high school girls who are just being sweet and nice because I'm my brother's brother.
yeah.
And I just get to get through this gauntlet of like
Yeah. Just
girls.
get through it. Just survive it. Just survive it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for people like our climber, his awareness and his comfort level with doing lots of things that are novel,
Mm-hmm.
that he perceives certain things. He does not perceive certain things to be dangerous that we perceive to be, in the same way that I perceive to be walking through the gauntlet of girls to be a dangerous thing.
Right.
The challenge is, of course, that we do tend to, um, strength begets strength in terms of neural real estate. And if I'm paying attention to these kinds of things and I'm engaged in these kinds of things and so forth and so on,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm not engaging in other things.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what strikes me as and this is for anybody who's watched the movie, what strikes I think anybody who's watched the movie is the relationship between the climber and his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a stunning example of when you watch her experience of this,
Right.
it raises questions about what's
Mm-hmm.
going on.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you there's another movie documentary movie called The Alpinist.
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which it's a similar kind of there's a similar kind of and the climber that is followed in that documentary. When you start to the stories are about, and the way the story is told, there's a lot of attention paid to the act of climbing and all that this means and so forth and so on. There's no attention paid
Mm.
to the dynamics of their relational interactions with the people that are most deeply attached to them. Now when I say that, I don't mean that there's no, like with Free Solo, it's not like there's no attention paid to it and you see it, but it's not a movie that is attempting to ask the question, what's the overall general relational health of the main characters?
Right. Right.
That's not the question that the movie is asking.
Mm-mm.
Because if it were, then we might find that our characters in both of these films would be revealed to have certain kinds of vulnerability that are infinite in their depth, that they have worked really hard to protect.
Yeah. See, that's so interesting because it's like my initial thought was like this week was like, does that enhance their ability to respond to vulnerability? And it could be quite the opposite because you have to turn off a certain, if you're going to climb El Capitan without ropes.
Right. You're not, I can tell you, like, you're not
You
paying
can't.
attention to what
Yeah.
impact this has on your girlfriend.
Right.
And
Or
no
even
one,
on yourself, right? Even,
exactly.
yeah.
So, and that's the thing. If I'm cut off from others to begin with, to the degree that I'm cut off from others, is going to be the degree to which I'm cut off from parts of me. And the parts that I'm not cut off from, the parts of me that can climb really well and do all those kinds of things, those are the parts that are going to get lots and lots and lots of attention and practice. And the more they get practiced, the less everything else gets practiced. And so the rich become richer in one sense, and the poor become poorer in another sense. And it's like, so the very, like Free Solo, I mean, like, it's a commentary on Western culture. It's not just a story about a climber.
Yeah. It's like, what are we paying attention to?
Right. And the thing is that, like, all it would take would be, and we all know this, and this happens time and time again. We hear about these, the kind of like the extreme sporting folks, like the number of deaths that take place because of people who are like, and you're like, okay, like, you're just, you roll the dice, you play the numbers, and at some point it's likely that you're going to end up dying, and nobody's going to be surprised, and anybody who knows you is going to be furious and grief-stricken, and that's what they'll be left with. Because in many respects, there is a certain sense in which, just looking at the relative, chances, if we just look at statistic probabilities, any of us, like, if you just go out and get in your car, there's the chance that, something bad could happen, but not quite like it is if I'm trying to climb El Cap without any ropes.
Right.
And I just want to say, like, I'm not sitting here sitting in judgment about that. We're just making observations about the way humans work.
Right.
And if, for our listeners, if what you really want are deeply connected relationships in which you are flourishing vulnerably in the way you are most deeply made to flourish vulnerably, that's going to happen necessarily in relationships with other people in which your vulnerable self is connected with their vulnerable self, so that you can both have your shame be healed, and so that you can both go on to co-create beauty and goodness in the world.
Well said.
Because in some respects, we might say, yeah, it is a, when we watch Free Solo, like, it clearly is a commentary on what that one person is able to do.
Yeah.
I'm not sure to what degree, and we might say, oh gosh, that inspires a lot of people to do hard things, which that may be true. That's possible. The challenge is that the inherent storyline underneath this is that the hard things that you must do on your own without any assistance.
Right.
And the likelihood that leads to life ultimately, or that it leads to me ultimately becoming a better version of myself,
yeah,
I would say the jury's still out on that.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's a great reflection, though, that you're talking about. That's a really great example of kind of, in some respects, the antithesis of what we're really
searching for or striving for. Yeah. But and then the idea that we are vulnerable, so I can stop trying to eradicate that and embrace it and for the beautiful thing that it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to say this while we're here, and I can just say this because it's you and me talking,
Hmm.
and not just because
Not
Pepper's not
that
here.
guy. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say, I don't. Has it been 10 years that we've known each other? Has
You
it
and
has it been?
I,
I
I
can't
think
remember.
it's close. Did season start 2013?
I can't remember. My book came out in
It's
2010. I first met Nicole Johnson
mhm.
in the summer of 2010, and then I don't know if it was the spring of
Then
2011 or
20,
spring of 2012 when we gathered in Southern California that first time when all of
oh,
us were
then
there.
it's been 10 years because it's at least since 2012. It might have
Right.
been a little
So
bit
right.
before. So yeah.
So in that time, and especially over the course of the time that we did seasons, all those number of weekends that we would share together,
Mhm.
you and I have had any number of really deep, meaningful conversations together,
Mhm. Yeah.
and I would say that just an added element that is significant is that like I'm a dude and you're a woman,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
there are certain ways in which, of course, we long to be vulnerable with everybody, but we also want to do so with wisdom and grace and care and so forth. And so, anytime we say it, like anytime uh, men and women are in the room, like sex is in the room. Like,
Yeah.
we say there's this notion of like, and not it's not like people aren't having sex, but this notion of longing to be known, even in that way, this longing to be known deeply by someone of the other gender, to be
Right.
cared for, because there's
And that
parts of
is
me.
and that is true. So it's like vulnerability is true. That is true. So we don't have
Right.
to our response to it is what we can focus on, not that the fact that it's here and eradicate it.
Right. And in so naming it, we
Mhm.
also create protection for our relationship.
Mhm.
Um, but I just want to say, for a listening audience, because you and I don't get to have these opportunities, like I just want to say how grateful I am for our
Mm.
relationship
Mm. Mm.
and for the number of times I remember the summer that we had seasons, and we were having this. It was a seasons weekend, and it was sometime in June, early July, or whatever.
Mhm.
And my brother Mark was near death,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I remember being comforted
Mm.
by you,
Ah,
and others at seasons. But
yeah.
I just remember that, and I'm just saying, like, I'm just really grateful for the relationship that I've had. I know Pepper would say the same thing
Right.
about
Mhm.
the stories that we've shared with each other about our lives, in which that vulnerability has been true, and just really grateful for that.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I'm so grateful. And what I think of is and we'll talk about it more next week, but confessional communities. Like I didn't even know what we go into it sometimes not knowing. Like the conversations you and I have had that that are vulnerable and share things that not everybody knows, or just an openness, but not even knowing. It's almost like I fell into it, like our
Hmm.
conversations, that it's just like, just show up and talk,
Hmm.
and the magic happens. Like
Hmm.
it's just,
Hmm. Yeah.
and we don't find that with everyone, but
Yeah.
we have found it. And I am,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I can think of so many conversations at seasons that were deep and rich and fun. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Right on.
All right. This has been good.
Been great. Right.
We don't have Pepper to sign us or get us out of here.
No. But we'll see him and we'll see each other next week.
Yep.
All right.
Right. Thanks, Kurt.
All right. Thanks.